Turn that on. I'd like to call to order the regular meeting for the Lebanon Board of Education for October 16th, 2023. I've got 6:01. Everybody please rise for the pledge for our junior ROTC program.
Color guard, halt. Left, ace. Carry, colors. Freeze in, colors.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Carry, colors. Order, colors. Colors, colors turn, arch.
Thank you. We will give them a second to rejoin us in the room.
Step up to the podium right there.
Thanks for coming tonight. If you would all like to introduce yourself with your name, your years in ROTC, and what's your favorite thing about it?
Hello, my name is Cadet Technical Sergeant Evan Fox. This is my second year in ROTC. The thing I like most about ROTC is the family aspect to it. You know everybody knows you.
My name is Layla Jones. I'm a cadet airman basic, and this is my first year. And I like the responsibility behind ROTC.
I'm Cadet Airman. I'm Cadet Senior Airman, and I've done this for 2 years, and I think I love all the opportunities that I get.
Cadet Technical Sergeant Elijah Workman. My favorite part of being in ROTC is the family that I've made.
Any questions? We do appreciate your coming out to the board meetings, and we'll see you again soon. Thank you.
Have a good night.
Thank you. Thanks for being here.
Item number 3 on the agenda is roll call. Mrs. Irvin?
Mr. Lane?
Here.
Mrs. Cope?
Here.
Mrs. Dalton? Mrs. Larson?
Here.
Mr. McCutcheon?
Here.
Item number 4 is adoption of the agenda. I need a motion to approve the agenda as presented.
So moved.
Second.
I do have one modification, if we can make it ahead of time. Down in other business, item 12B, the last sentence there says that this project was proposed pricing through the cooperative purchasing agreement with TIPS. We need to strike the pricing bid through. After that, the cooperative purchasing agreement with TIPS, we actually did a competitive bid agreement where we put out a request for proposals. So I think we just need to finish that with saying proposed pricing bid through competitive bidding. We received multiple quotes for these bleachers and did not end up using TIPS. That was a mistake based on how it was originally bid, and we did not change the language in this agreement, so sorry for that.
Okay. So I need to roll call a new motion.
The motion on the floor is to approve. So we would need a second motion.
Okay,
To
so I need a
amend.
motion to approve the revised agenda.
So moved.
There you go.
Second.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments on the agenda as modified? Mrs. Irvin?
Mrs. Cope?
Yes.
Mr. McCutcheon?
Yes.
Mrs. Larson?
Yes.
Mr. Lane?
Yes.
Motion carried.
Item number 5, communications and reports. There is nobody on the hearing of the public for tonight. So move on to B, student board member Alexa Lane.
October would be that October.
Turn your mic on.
Sorry. All right, so the first thing on the agenda is on October 2nd was National Custodian Appreciation Day. So NHS students spent our meeting on October 5th, I believe, making appreciation cards for the high school custodians, and we had them delivered to them as well. So just something small to show appreciation for all that they do. Yeah. Performing arts, last week the high school orchestras and band had their fall concerts, so that's starting up their concert season, and then the choir concerts will be starting this week. On Wednesday, October 11th, freshmen through juniors completed testing, and it was a great success. The tests taken were the PSAT, the pre-ACT, and the ASVAB, and then seniors had the day off. And then this past Friday, or 2 Fridays ago, was the mental health and pink out game. Something special about this game too was it was like kind of sponsored by Skyline, but the football team did a great job honoring cancer awareness and mental health awareness. They all have 988 stickers on their helmets, which is the suicide prevention and mental health hotline number. So that's super good to see that's being embedded into the athletics as well. They beat Kings 20-14, which is huge because that last year we lost to Kings, so this is a great turnaround. And then sophomore Daniel Wallace was named Skyline Chili Crosstown MVP Athlete of the Game. Some sports updates for you. The girls golf team and boys golf team members Peyton Lawley and Stam Strasser qualified and played at districts. The girls cross country team finished 3rd at their ECC conference meet, and the boys finished 6th. And then the postseason for other fall sports are starting up in the next week in coming weeks. And some Warrior Pride for you. Senior Caden Lowry was recognized as the National Merit Student. This is based off of his PSAT score, so it's a huge congrats to Caden. And then some upcoming events before the next board meeting is that the college fair is tomorrow at the high school. Students will be going during the day, and there's an opportunity, I believe, to go after school as well. Bridges weekend will be next weekend, November 3rd through 5th, so students will leave school at around 12 and return on Sunday. Athletics signing day will be Wednesday, November 8th, and the Sophomore Explore Day at the Career Center will be Thursday, November 16th. This will be an opportunity for the sophomores to tour the classes, and from my experience, it was super great. I got to go to some classes that I thought that I would be interested in as a career, so it was a super great experience.
Thank you. Esther, anything you want to add about the sophomore visits? Looking forward to that?
No, that's just always a big day for the students to get a chance to visit the different programs and explore the school and see if that's going to be the best choice for them.
Perfect. Isaac, superintendent report.
Yeah, so a couple things here. This first couple things are a requirement that we have under state law and really under funding. And so we have to talk about it at a board meeting, and then we have to post the statements, which will be a little bit longer than what I'm sharing with you this evening, on our websites for people to see. So student wellness funding, like what we've looked at right now is beginning last school year, schools got revenue kind of different ways. Disadvantaged Pupil Impact Aid, DPIA. We got a base cost student wellness and success fund, so it's now worked into the funding formula. And with it worked into funding formula, Karen has to show how we're spending it on those specific reasons, or we don't get it anymore. And then there's also remaining balances going back to 2020, 2021 on student wellness and success funds prior to it going into the budget formula, right? Those are 3 different buckets of money, Karen, correct? Mm-hmm. And this is a lot of information, but I'm going to skip to the important parts here for you. Disadvantaged Pupil Impact Aid. So we've talked about this. We have about 25% of our students are identified as free and reduced lunch or disadvantaged pupils. With that, we get some DPIA money to be spent on services that are non-academic or can be academic that impact the economically disadvantaged students. There are several ways that we do this. We're paying for attendance services through the Warren County ESC, so we have a requirement to do attendance and attendance monitoring. And then, but what these person does is $44,000. They actually work with the families, they work with the schools, they work through juvenile courts if there's a court issue involved with that as well. And so what we're doing there is using some of these monies to pay for that attendance service through the Warren County Career Center. The other thing that we have is, we have some behavioral coaches now that we're using this money for, and looking at it through the benefit of monitoring and supporting student behaviors, intervention strategies, things like that. So there's a breakdown of how that money's being spent. I think that's all of it, right, Karen? That's a small
Yes.
amount of money for
Yes.
us.
It's very
So
small.
$55,400 in that money. So that's how it's being spent. There's a little bit more information that'll be available online when that gets posted there as well. Student wellness and success. It's specifically given, as was an initiative of Governor DeWine, offer mental and physical health services, mentoring, support services specific to vulnerable youth, after-school activities. We use student wellness and success funds to do several things. We have a resource coordinator. For us, that's Lynn Payne, for those of you who know Lynn that works for us. A resource coordinator. A lot of that comes through a grant that's through the ESC. The remaining $19,000 is paid for out of the student wellness and success dollars. We partner with families, we meet, they work with school and parents to look at what's necessary or what's needed by the families. And then Lynn works with government and community agencies to get them what they need. The other thing that's here is the Wellness Center through the Warren County ESC, so that's a large dollar amount. Well, this is specifically, we have specific students that are in need of very specific instructional services through the Wellness Center. It has a lot to do with mental health counseling. And so it's an outplacement for us. So it's really how can we help with these students and the goal is to get them back and acclimated back into the school environment after this placement. But it's for those students who are in need at the time in trauma or in need specific mental health services. So it's a large dollar amount, but it's a very, very expensive program for kids that need it. And then remaining funds are used for health supplies, so things that our nurses' offices may need for student wellness initiatives. Also, we had some trauma bags that were paid for kind of out of COVID funds, and some of those things have expiration dates on them, and so we have to update that. So we're trying to restock some of those trauma bags for classrooms and buildings as well. So those are the two required things we're supposed to talk to you about, right? So we've satisfied our requirements. Does anybody have any question about those two items? Anything to add, Karen?
This came from the new budget bill, so it's just something that we are required to do now that we have the separation of funds.
Okay. The next thing is to make you aware, and I'm not going to go through all of this. I'll share this information with you before I go tonight in a document. But I want to kind of say it publicly and give some families an opportunity to look at this. Beginning last school year, building administrators at the high school, central office administrators, including myself, began talking about our high school schedule. We currently operate on an 8-period day. That means there's 8 opportunities, 8 different classes at the high school. It starts very early. One of the number one complaints I hear from families and parents is school starts way too early. That's too young. Can we do anything about start times? Well, start times are typically dictated by busing. And so in order to change anything with our start time, we have to change busing. And we're always kind of that's not possible. We can't really do much with that. We were having a separate conversation between the transportation department and business office and central office about how can we become more efficient in our current transportation department. maybe fewer buses that we have to purchase in the future, maybe fewer drivers now that they're getting harder to find when we have vacancies. Only way to do that would be to move to what they call three-tier routes. So right now, drivers will drive like high school and junior high routes, and then they'll drive Donovan routes. So 2 tiers, two different routes. Or some will drive junior high only, then Berry, then Bowman. So we do have some 3-tier routes, which means we have a driver who's going to be spending the majority of their time driving. And right now there's a little bit of wait because of starting and ending times. So we're having a separate discussion about transportation. High school is looking at schedule. And the only way that schedule is possible is if transportation is possibly able to change. So we've reached a little bit of a place now where, like, in theory, we can move this out of theory, right? It's no longer like, well, if we could change transportation, we could address the high school schedule. We now know it's feasible to address starting and ending times with transportation. There are some studies that we're doing. There's some analysis of that. We're going to look at, does it make sense financially? And so we've moved into this next phase of high school discussion of not just talking about with staff. We want to get some student and some parent input on possibilities with scheduling. So later this evening, Mr. Reynolds is going to be sending out an email to all high school families, kind of talking through some possible changes to the scheduling, some FAQs about things that have come up during the staff survey. This is not an imminent change. We're still analyzing and reviewing this possibility. The earliest we would do anything would be next school year. Like, we are not at all rushing into a decision on this. What would it kind of here? Like I said, we've talked about transportation. Staff members are already been surveyed. We've talked about some potential staffing challenges that we have. And we've identified that at this point in time, that's not enough of a barrier for us to say we can't move forward. So we're going to take the next step and get some more information. So what does that look like? We did a staff survey. Looking at this, it's kind of small here, but the blue piece of the pie is staff feedback. So there are 94 staff members at the high school, only 54 responded to the survey. So put that out there to begin with. The blue, 31.5% said they would support a change to a 7-bell day. We'll talk a little about what that means in a minute. 29% preferred to stay with the 8-bell day. And then you have 13 and 26, basically 39% said, I don't care or I have no preference. I don't know or I have no preference. This was pretty early, it's a couple weeks ago, feedback, and they had provided a lot of questions as well. There are still quite a bit of questions around some things that we're still trying to get answers back to people. Maybe that's the hang up that they have and they'd be supportive of it later. The one thing I want to say to the board and to anybody who happens to watch this, the 7-period day is like a common bell schedule that is used by most schools. We are an anomaly at an 8-period day. So by switching, if we were to switch to a 7-period day, we're not inventing any sort of special, course curriculum guide here, right? Like, this has been done. There are a lot of schools that have very thriving academics and, arts programs, elective courses and academic programs on a 7-period day. So I think some of that is a little bit of fear because we've had an 8-bell day for a long time, but 7 periods is really possible. Here's some of the reasons. Here's some of the things we're going to be doing. Tonight, an email will go to parents. On the 18th, there's going to be some pros and cons, some FAQs that'll be given to staff members sort of as discussions. They're asking staff members to talk to their students and team about it. What questions do you have? Here's some benefits and some drawbacks to possibly a change. Collect additional questions that we can get from students at the time. There'll be a survey that goes out, and that goes out on the 25th for students and parents, and that'll be open until November 1st. I put in there, Isaac, will be beginning meeting with student representatives at LHS on November 1st. I'm going to start doing like a superintendent focus group about a lot of different things, but the first topic we'll try to cover on the agenda will be this. What are their thoughts on it? Tell me what your concerns are about that as well. So that's kind of the timeline for the next several weeks. Here's the 3 priorities of why we even tried. So the big bullet points. One of the things we looked at was, could we get a shorter student day with a later start time? Why do we need a shorter student late? We don't need one. It's the common concern we have from people is our start time. At 430 minutes, 7 hours and 10 minutes, we have the longest school day in Warren County. We also, by having 8 periods instead of 7, have one of the fewest amount of contact hours in Warren County because we are at a 40, I want to say like 40, what's the bell time at the high school, ladies?
For what bell?
Like how long are bells? 42 minutes?
Roughly, yeah.
Like, that gets longer when you go to fewer periods. So even though our school day is longer than everybody else in Warren County, the amount of time that each teacher has with that group of students is actually less than other schools in Warren County. So how can we create a shorter day? The average school day in Warren County is 6 hours and 43 minutes. We have the earliest start time by far, 23 minutes less than the average in Warren County, which we are part of the average, by the way. So we help drive that down. And then our start time is pretty much where everybody else ends. Ending time of 2:25, 2:24, 2:25. So with that, a shorter day with a later start time was one possible benefits of this. The second thing was increased instructional time. Even though we would go from, right now, we have some periods that are less than 45, and I think it's an average of 45 because of lunch periods and stuff like that. Just adding the 3 minutes per bell doesn't seem like much, but over the course of a school year is 175 school days. It's additional 8 hours and 45 minutes of instruction per class, so per content with the teacher. So that 3 minutes over time is more time with them in their course of instruction. And then the third priority or opportunity here would be professional time for teachers. Currently, our high school staff members start when kids can come in the building, doors open, staff's contract time starts. Not long before class starts because our day is so long. A teacher contract and our teacher's contract is 7 hours and 30 minutes. So with a 7 hour and 10 minute student day, there's 20 minutes of time, but we open up the doors in the morning 15 minutes before school starts, 15 or 20 minutes. So the end of the day for teachers pretty much ends right as school is ending, 5 minutes afterwards. If you've ever been in a high school, right, 5 minutes after class ends is still utter chaos in a hallway, right? Kids are still at their locker. Teachers' contract time technically ends 5 minutes after students' school day ends. That is not the case in any other building in our district. There's time at the beginning of school for teacher collaboration. There's a little bit of time at the end of school for teacher collaboration. And so this would maybe get us a little bit of time, some things we lost, maybe with some early release on department discussions, things like that. So staff would probably still start at their same time and would come in 25 minutes before kids, would leave 5 minutes after or 10 minutes after. So we'd have some built-in professional time with teachers there. What would change? The proposal would go from 8 periods to 7 periods. Students would start 30 minutes later in the morning, which would impact buses, which we believe is possible, and we're doing some further research into what that would look like for us. What wouldn't change? Students would still get out 225. We wouldn't be cutting any of our course offerings, right? We're not getting rid of study halls. We're not getting rid of any of our electives. We're going to include the same offerings for kids. We're going to keep, at this point in time, the discussion has been to keep double bell classes like science, PE, teacher academy, service experiences, things like that would still remain as double bells unless something changes in the future with those. And then the last thing here is, I think the one thing we've talked about, currently our graduation requirements are 20 credits for high school. That's the state minimums, what the state requires, to where we are as a district as well. Our 8-period day, plus they have the ability to get 3.5 credits at the junior high. Students can, and sometimes do, graduate from Lebanon High School with 35.5 credits, almost twice as many as you need to graduate in the state of Ohio or at Lebanon. Even if we go to a 7-period day, they still have the ability to earn 31.5 credits, still well above the state minimum and our minimum. So it doesn't impact their ability to get graduation requirements. So I'm telling the board, I'll answer any questions you have. I wanted to share this with you and then kind of introduce it's going out to families soon. Thoughts, questions, concerns from the board?
I have a question. So does this schedule change staffing needs, like needing less teachers, more teachers?
So right now, our discussion has been that it would, right now at the high school, there are 8 periods in the day, and our teachers are teaching, for the most part, 6 of those 8 bells. They have a planning period, one bell, and they have some sort of duty, like a study hall or something, the 8th bell. So they would, under this scenario, would teach 6 classes and have a planning period. They would not have a duty unless we don't need the full schedule for them for some reason. So what would probably need to happen is we would need to look at either some study hall monitors, aides to cover other things. So it might need to add, a study hall monitor position or some sort of support for those types of needs that we have currently in supervision. It would increase the amount of time in a day that a teacher is teaching by 3 minutes per period, right? Because right now they're not going to have a duty under a new scenario right now. And by the way, that's common. That's what it is in every other building, right, in our district. Teachers are not typically doing duties in other buildings, but like they are at the high school. There's a possibility that under the way that we currently run our special education program, we need to look at kind of how we're doing inclusion classes and the number of inclusion classes that we have. But under our current scenario, intervention specialists are teaching 7 periods and then have their planning period. And so if nothing changes in how we do special education, then we would need to consider maybe needing to add an intervention specialist or 2 to cover that. But we also look at the ratios, we also look at all of our numbers. There might be some possibilities for that to change.
May not need, it'll be interesting to see how the math shakes out, because if you have less periods, it's less opportunities for study halls where the kids might have multiple today.
Correct. We recognize there's a lot of other things that maybe have to happen. Like right now, some kids take a study hall for a semester, but not the other semester. Or some kids, sometimes based on the schedule works, have 2 periods of study hall in a semester, right? That's not going to be possible under this. Right. Like it's going to balance itself out differently. So there are some concerns that have been mentioned about how will this impact our performing arts numbers. And so we've talked about that. I mean, I go back to this slide I had earlier. There are plenty of high-performing, arts programs on a 7-period day as well. Like, we'll have to look at how we can make it available. Kids may have to make a choice, right, that they don't have to make now. I don't know what that number would look like, but it is, or what the full impact of that may be. That's one concern that came out of the staff surveys. As a possible concern. Study hall was a big question on the staff surveys, like, how will kids get study halls in this plan? Well, they can take 6 classes and still take a study hall, and that would get them to 24 possible credits over a 4-year period, still more than what they need. So it's possible to do those things.
So that was my other question, which is distantly related to your presentation, but since you brought up county averages, where do we stand at 20 credits for high school or for graduation versus the rest of the county?
It's a question.
I don't expect that you have that on hand.
I do not know that on hand, but I will ask the question.
Does anybody know when they changed from 7 to 8 bells and what the justification for doing that was?
It's another great question. I will ask that. It's my understanding it's been that way for a while.
It wasn't when I was here.
Yeah.
We were 7 bells. Which I know was a long time ago. Go ahead.
I was actually going to say the teachers wanted to see you less, so they actually added more classes.
Got you. Okay. I knew there had to have been a reason.
Yeah. So I don't know the answer to that question. I'll ask and see. Historically, I think the context of it was, I know that a lot of our changes in the high school schedule happened when we were in some budget cuts and things as a district. And so courses that are offered at the junior high that gets high school credits got kids to their graduation number of 20 or 24 credits, whatever it was at the time, sooner, right? Which meant we needed to have fewer teachers. And so in order to offer offerings for kids, we had to be able to offer more class periods per teachers because we had fewer teachers.
My personal experience is, it matches up to this at all. You may find out that happened when there's some new construction in the district. 'Cause I've seen that in other districts where they expand or contract the number of periods in a day based on new construction.
I'll get you guys an answer. I'll get you guys an answer to that. My understanding is, I think it had to do with providing as many opportunities for kids when there were fewer classes and teachers available because of budget cuts. That's my understanding at this point in time, but I can't speak to that definitively.
One of them might have been also adding more electives. That-
Yes.
That those were.
Which we had a bunch of electives, they cut them, and we brought a lot of them
Right.
back.
Right.
Yeah.
So you think that this schedule change would possibly cost more money? Or?
I think that there's going to be there should be a savings on the transportation side by going to 3 tiers.
How could that be?
We need fewer buses in the long run. There's currently downtime in schedules. So because high school and junior high had to get here at a certain time, you'll see in the morning there are buses that will be stopped for periods of time and parked like out here in the parking lot, down at the fairgrounds, things like that, kind of waiting for their next route to start. If we can change that scheduling a little bit, we'll have less downtime.
But
If
more
we have
miles on the
more-
buses.
Yes, but if we have more 3-tier routes, you also have the need for fewer buses in the replacement cycle, which we know those are expensive, and potentially even fewer drivers. They will work more time, the drivers that you have will work more hours possibly, but you need fewer of them. And so I did this in my previous district, right? Part of the calculation that happens in the study is you talk about bus replacement is a savings, fewer drivers because you need fewer than, individual routes types of things. There is a cost increase of paying that driver more because they're gonna be driving more. But it also ends up being a situation where, once you begin to realize you can kind of move things around, you then begin to find some greater savings of things, right? Like, we have some routes where buses are running at half capacity because you go out to this section of town, right? When you do an efficiency study, one of the facts that we learned as we talked about this for transportation, there's an efficiency score for transportation, okay? If you're at a 1.0 efficiency score and all of the data that we submit or higher, you get an efficiency bonus. The state will actually give you more money to transport kids because you're doing so more efficiently than others, okay? We are currently at like a 0.93. So below what the state says is the threshold for like efficiency. We're actually doing pretty well from where we were before, but shifting to the number of tiers and looking at it this way does then in turn open up the ability for an additional $80,000 to $100,000 in efficiency bonuses, like some of the people that were above 1. So that's part of it. We are not, I will say this to the board right now, the changes in high school scheduling, no part of our discussion at this point in time has been fewer people or cost savings to the district. It's been about those 3 topics we talked about there earlier. How can we start school later? How can we get more time in each individual class and maximize instructional time with students? And how can we create time for staff members to have time professionally to work together?
How will that affect the lunchtime and getting all the lunches in?
I mean, there are schedules, like, there are multitudes of different ways to run a 7-period day. There's a state minimum for the amount of time you have to have for lunches, and we'll make sure that we have enough time. Sometimes it's a whole period in certain places. Sometimes it's, you run a schedule and there's 8 periods, but one of those periods is your lunch. You really only have 7 classes. Like, there are ways to schedule it. But lunch has not been, that hang-up of scheduling hasn't been an issue.
Okay.
It is still very early and the decision has not been made. So we are still taking input, and we want to hear some feedback and questions. And so I thought it was best that I bring it to you before we send it to anybody else. Anything else?
Interested to see the thoughts and results.
Yeah, we'll share that with you when it comes in. I mean, I just shared the one kind of picture of where our staff is on whether they like this or not. My experience, when you ask people survey questions, you get the ones who absolutely want it, you get the ones who don't want it, and a lot of those 40 people in the middle who didn't answer the survey, most of them just says, tell me when to show up, what to teach, and let me do my job, right? Like, I think we saw the both ends of the spectrum on the 30-some percent of support or not support. My guess is most people fall in that middle of just tell me what to do. So we'll see. We'll get more feedback.
Okay.
Okay?
Okay, moving on to D, board committee reports. I'm gonna go straight to the CAT committee, Mr. McCutcheon.
No meeting this past month. We do have one scheduled for November the 16th, and I believe the agenda is the updated 5-year forecast, which we all look forward to. So I will have more to share. That's before our next board meeting. That's it.
Legislative liaison, Mrs. Cope.
There are a lot of things that are kind of in committee, been passed by one, like the House, not the Senate. A lot of stuff just kind of hanging out there. I would say probably the thing that affects us the most is the State Board of Education and the things moving forward with that. So that's just something that I think we need to keep an eye on, and people need to educate themselves on what's happening there.
Karen and I just went to a meeting today with Auditor Matt Nolan, other county superintendents and treasurers about House Bill 187. So House Bill 187 was originally introduced for the purposes of trying all the large, the property valuation increases we're seeing across the state. Butler County and Claremont County auditors and their representatives went together and drafted legislation that would basically try to mitigate the impact of those increases. So what they originally were wanting to do was to change the floor, which we are on the 20 mil floor. So what happens when you're on the 20 mil floor is when property values go up, that means your property tax rates drop, but they can't go any lower than the floor. So when property values go up and property taxes decrease, which is a normal thing that happens, at the floor, they have to raise the rate back up to get the 20 mils, which would mean that in most schools in Warren County, except for 2, Carlisle and Franklin, that we would see a increase in local property taxes when the property valuation happens, because we're at the 20 mil floor. So what they're trying to do was basically say, let's get rid of the floor. So that doesn't happen. They can't do that. They'd have to change the floor. They, instead of doing away with the floor last week, negotiated amongst themselves in the House of Representatives, changed it to where they were going to do a 3-year average. And so instead of, in Warren County, they look at last year's property sales, and Matt Nolan says property values now have gone up this amount. And then they go to the taxation, they say, find this place, right? Property taxation. They wanted to do a 3-year average, they called it a smoothing, which would be the property valuation year and the 2 years prior, which obviously would drive that rate of increase down using a 3-year average. It passed out of the House after a lot of arm twisting last week, is what we were told. There's a lot of wrangling up there. It's gone to the Senate, and we thought it was going to go through the Senate pretty quickly, and then all of a sudden we heard on Friday it's effectively done and killed in the Senate, is what we are hearing at this point in time, that we don't think it's going to make it out of the Senate. They specifically mentioned, and they brought this up today, Matt Nolan mentioned this today, when they went to their caucus and they went to their discussions, they specifically mentioned that senators and House of Representatives and representatives in Columbus said when local Board of Education members called them and explained what the impact was going to be in their districts, they heard that. More so than when the superintendent or the treasurer called, or more so when the lobbyists that represent us, OSBA, OASBO, and BASA. So I think it's really maybe a lesson to learn here, that when you have things that are of importance to us or to you and as a district to us, that contacting either Steve Lips or Steve Wilson, Scott Lips, Steve Wilson, or Adam Matthews, those things that carry some weight when board members call them. So it's not going away, right? It's not going to go away, so we just need to stay informed with it. But that was something that came out of the House last week that we're hearing today is effectively done in the Senate. Because it's complicated and they decided we can't make a Band-Aid fix right now that actually impacts school funding on the other side of it. And there are some ripple effects that were pretty broad. Not that they didn't want to say you should get all that money, but what they knew was it impacted state funding from the state foundation in other ways. So that's a pretty big one. I was going to send you an email after Karen and I stuff today, but I'll say it publicly tonight. So.
Okay, moving on to Warren County Career Center, Mrs. Larson.
Okay, our next meeting is this coming Thursday again, so ours is before theirs. Would like to remind people, though, that the Career Center does have a bond issue on the ballot, and it's for new construction. Right now at the Atrium campus, we are at 100% capacity, and also at the main campus. There were 800 applicants for this year, and we could only serve 534 of those. So we definitely need more space. And to gain more information about the bond issue, I would suggest that they go to the Warren County Career Center website.
Okay. Item number 6 is the approval of the minutes from September 18th, 2023. Do I have a motion to approve?
So moved.
Second.
Any questions or comments on the minutes as presented? Roll call, please.
Mr. McCutcheon?
Yes.
Mrs. Cope?
Yes.
Mr. Lane?
Yes.
Mrs. Larson?
Yes.
Motion carried.
Item number 7, financial. I need a motion to approve. I think I can do items A through F.
So moved.
Second.
Mrs. Irvin?
Yes. So taking a look, we are 3 months into the new fiscal year. The first slide I always show you is the current forecast. As Mr. McCutcheon just mentioned, next month we will be updating that forecast to the November. So you'll see that first set of columns drop off and a new 2028 will show up. So just taking a look at this, we know a lot has changed since May. So I'm very curious to see how this is all going to shake out. The budget bill changed state funding. We've got changes with property taxes. We've got a lot of movement. So I'll be presenting that to the CAT committee before the board meeting, but then I'll give you the updated version at your next board meeting. So taking a look as we have it right now, 3 months in, We noticed an interesting trend last month where our first month started high and it kind of tapered off. Well, now comparing that gray line is our current fiscal year. The red line is what we've estimated, and then the blue line, which is very difficult to see, is our last year actuals. You can tell that what actually happened in this third month is our cash balance is slightly less than it was last year, but so close you can barely tell. So it seems to be normalizing a bit, and we'll talk a little bit about what is happening as far as revenues and expenses to make that happen. So 3 months into the year, we're looking at about 25%. And I probably say this every single month, but on our revenue side, we typically receive more revenue at the beginning of the year because we get predominantly property tax revenue. Property tax revenue is paid in 2 times a year. So you're going to see spikes and then it will normalize. So right now we're at 36%, which is a little less than what we projected, but really close to what we projected. Expenses were right at 25%, which is a great thing. Again, very close to the projection. What I did notice this time, we have our purchase services and our materials and supplies are a bit higher. And you typically start seeing that when school starts because we have to provide those things for the students who come on board. We don't always know what to expect before our student population gets here. So it's a pretty normal trend, but we're right in line with our target. Just wanted to give you this. I took a look at last year's PowerPoint and saw this slide and thought, hey, I should do this again. So just looking at over the quarter, the last 3 months, we pulled in about 23.4 million, and overall, compared to last year, that's about a 2% decrease from last year. A lot of that, you'll see, it says other revenues. That is the primary driver, and if you remember, I've said this, I feel like a million times, but we changed how we did advances. That was driving up our revenues without actually being a revenue. So that is the difference that you see there, is it's simply we are not doing a monthly advance out to all the funds and then recollecting it in the next month. So that drove our numbers down in general. Expenses, you see a very similar trend. It is 3% higher than last year, but also you see that other expenses. That's another decrease, same reason, those advance ins and outs. But overall, we saw a very high increase in the purchase services and materials from last year. And this is just quarter one. So I'm curious to see if that is just a timing effect or if that will continue. And as I always say, we'll keep monitoring that. If we notice anything large in the forecast, we'll make those adjustments. But if you remember, by the end of the fiscal year last year, it had pretty much evened out compared to the prior year. Really quickly on the slide before that, just wanted to mention our interest continues to rise, and we will start to see state funding changes as of October 1st. So we got new payments in October. I'm hoping to be able to report some of those changes to you in November to see what that change is in the first month of the receipts. And we haven't seen anything that's obvious yet on the substitute levy. I hope soon to be able to present you some information on how that has done collections-wise. Just a reminder, November 7th, get out and vote. We will hopefully be able to present you the results of the district's permanent improvement levy in November once that voting tally has been made. And then, of course, we'll get your forecast. I've included the same slide that I've included the last couple of times. I just wanted to give a clarification. We've heard several questions regarding this particular levy. We have had a levy on the ballot for as long as my records mention, and I go all the way back to 1974. The particular levy that we're renewing has only been in effect since 1998, but that's still 25 years that this exact levy has been on the ballot. So there's been some questions, concern about that information, so I just wanted to highlight that we have had some form of income specifically geared towards our permanent improvements since at least 1974, when my spreadsheet begins.
So that basically the district has supported a permanent improvement levy for nearly 50 years.
Yes. There will, as I mentioned every time, this is not a tax increase, this is simply a renewal. So it's a 5-year, 2 mil levy, and we can only use it for our capital improvements. So buildings, buses, grounds, textbooks, computers, those kind of things. That's all I have.
Okay, to go through the rest of item 7B is approving the monthly reports. C is a list of amended appropriations. D is amended certificate of estimated resources. E is a list of pretty healthy donations this month. Thank you for everybody on the list. F is activity, purpose, and budget statement. Karen, anything you want to add on that one?
That is just one, and it's for our orchestra group, which we have at Berry in the junior high
Okay.
and the high school.
Any questions on items A through F? Roll call, please.
Mr. Lane?
Yes.
Mrs. Cope?
Yes.
Mrs. Larson?
Yes.
Mr. McCutcheon?
Yes.
Motion carried.
Item number 8 is public records requests. Item number 9, I need a motion to approve the first reading for almost a couple dozen policies.
So moved.
Second.
All right, if everybody bear with me, I'll just read through the topics. You do not want me to be here for the next 12 hours reading all these policies to you. 1 is conflict of interest. 2 is a notice of meetings. 3 is weapons. 4 is third grade reading guarantee. 5 is employment of personnel for co-curricular, extracurricular activities. 6 is another version of the weapons. 7, employment of personnel for co-curricular, extracurricular activities. Again, these are, Isaac, how would we define these are different from each other?
1 is for classified personnel and 1 is for certified personnel. So 1 is for those with a teaching license, and 1 is for not.
Thank you. Number 8 is also weapons. Number 9 is immunization. 10 is care of students with active seizure disorders. 11, the Board of Revision complaints and counter complaints. That is a new one. The prior one was also new. 12, Fair Labor Standards Act. 13, weapons. 14, facility security. 15 is volunteers. 16 is school calendar. 17, student records. 18, transportation. 19 is also transportation but by school van. And 20 is public attendance at school events. And 21 is equivalent education outside the schools and participation in extracurricular students for not enrolled in the district. Any
So-
comments on those?
No, not necessarily. So we met with Norm, our representative from Neola, last week. These are all in their fall updates. It's as a result of some change that's happened in court where they've, and state law, where they've defined further what a weapon is, or something along those lines. Like, that's why you see weapons on here. They're not real changes from current practice. There's a definition change or some things. I am going to send the board the, last time we had a big list of these, I sent you sort of the Reader's Digest version, that kind of overview of the changes. I pulled up my board policy packet right now to give that to you. I'll share that with you. If you have any questions about anything, I can.
It's nice that it was highlighted on
Yeah.
each one.
And
Yeah.
some of these are very
Yeah.
minor.
Yeah.
Just defining maybe that he, she is actually a board member in some cases. I saw one that was actually a spelling mistake. So, I mean, there's some pretty minor changes.
So,
in
so
several
one
of these.
question that was asked was, you know, kind of changing of like he, she to a board member, like a further clarification. We've talked very, kind of a lot with, Neola reps about this, like, not getting into changing things, cleaning up anything unless there's a substantial difference. So, kind of the change that's happened over the last 10 years or so in terms of writing in general, right? Legal documents, medical things. A lot of those documents have moved away from like the patient instead of he or she, right? Define, talking in terms of who it relates to. So we're not opening up policies to change anything to do with that unless there's a substantial difference. But, so we're not correcting spelling changes unless they're changing something else in it. But at the same time, most of it is response to a change in law, or they clarified, right? Like, under the conflict of interest, if you can have a job as a board member and work for a college or a university or some other school, but if the board was going to act on a contract between Lebanon City Schools and the college that you worked for or some other public entity that you work for, then this says you have to recuse yourself from voting on that. So they've clarified, we've always talked about like what conflict of interest means, right? They further clarified, because there are some cases that are out there, like, well, you can't vote on that if you're a professor at the university and you're going to benefit from us partnering with that university in that way. So there are things like that that have been clarified. So if you have any questions over the next month, send me those questions. I will answer. I will also send this to you right now as board members.
And just so you know, the two policies on here that are labeled new, those are driven from state law changes. They're just putting those into our policies so that we also have that language.
And I believe I've read all these, but we need a motion still, correct?
We have the motion.
We have the motion.
We
All
just
right.
need a vote.
So we need a roll call, please.
We're not accepting this is first reading.
This is just first
First
reading,
reading.
but you have to approve it as a first reading.
Okay.
Mrs. Cope?
Yes.
Mrs. Larson?
Yes?
Mr. Lane?
Yes.
Mr. McCutcheon?
Yes.
Motion carried.
Item number 10, other educational. Karen, I believe I can put these together, right?
Yes.
I need a motion to approve items A and B.
So move.
Second.
Thank you. So A is to approve a handful of winter sports handbooks for swimming, bowling, wrestling, boys and girls basketball, and cheerleading. And B is to approve an overnight out-of-state extended student trip, Lebanon High School School Bridges Retreat, and UCA National High School Cheerleading Championship. Any question on those? Roll call, please.
Mr. McCutcheon?
Yes.
Mrs. Larson?
Yes.
Mrs. Cope?
Yes.
Mr. Lane?
Yes.
Motion carried.
Item number 11, personnel. Can I have a motion to approve items A through P?
So move.
Second.
All right, read through these real fast. A is a list of one retirement. B, a list of resignations. C is employment pending background check. D is substitute employment. E is a list of supplementals. F is a resolution for non-licensed coaches. G is supplemental volunteer coaches. H is a list of change of status. I is volunteers, another healthy list of volunteers. We thank you very much for that. J is a leave of absence. K is special education stipend. L is stipend for the school year. M is tutors. N, curriculum leads. O is a resolution to authorize employment of non-bachelor substitutes. I think we've done that for a couple of years now.
Yeah, so this became a thing during COVID because subs were short. It got worked into state law that you can now do it even beyond COVID after the emergency resolutions. And so the boards, if we wanted to do this, were told we had to pass some sort of, MOU and agreement with that.
Have we done any of that?
We have some
Yes.
non-bachelor subs, absolutely.
Okay.
It's one of the only ways we can keep our doors open at this point in time. Yep.
And P is the approved revisions to the 2023-24 exempt handbook. Any other comments or questions on those items? Roll call, please.
Mrs. Larson?
Yes.
Mr. Lane?
Yes.
Mr. McCutcheon?
Yes.
Mrs. Cope?
Yes.
Motion carried.
Item number 12, I need a motion to approve item A.
So move.
Second.
Thank you. And this is to approve the memorandum of understanding between the Lebanon City School Board District Board of Education and the Ohio Association of Public School Employees to address vacation accrual and vacation payouts upon transfer of job classifications.
So if an employee was working for the district in an area where they qualified and accrued vacation, so that's 260-day employees, for the most part, like custodians, office staff, things like that. If they worked and they accrued vacation and then they went to a position that they no longer are eligible to take vacation or to accrue vacation, this, in the past, one of the things that has happened is that they've carried that vacation in case they ever went back to a position that had vacation, or they were paid out for it type of thing. We've made it to where now we're going to pay them out at the time. So if you're a custodian and you accrue vacation and you have some unused vacation and then you move to a classroom assistant position or, something like that, then we're going to pay you for your unused vacation times at that time at the rate at which you earned it, instead of holding on to it and carrying it for a while, because they're not eligible to use vacation as an aid. So cleans it up, gets an agreement. That was, for the most part, what we were doing before.
Sorry. Roll call, please.
Mrs. Cope?
Yes.
Mr. McCutcheon?
Yes.
Mr. Lane?
Yes.
Mrs. Larson?
Yes.
Motion carried.
12B, I need a motion to approve the proposal with outdoor aluminum.
So moved.
Second.
So this
go
is
ahead.
for the replacement of the home bleachers at Vandergrift Stadium. This was when we took our loan amount out with, a year, it seems like a year ago now. I don't know how long ago it was, Karen. We budgeted and planned for $1.6 million on this expense. So what I've placed in here is a not to exceed amount of that amount, which was the quote that we have for this. We're supposed to meet with this representative on Wednesday. By we, I mean Scott Butler, Keith Pantling, and myself, to discuss this proposal and then also to see if there's any ways that we can do some sort of value engineering and get that cost down and try to, what happens if this press box is not 700 square feet but 5, or, whatever those, see if there's some ways for us to do that. The other thing that, so that's where we're at on this. That's why I placed a not to exceed amount. We're hoping to work with them now that we've agreed to this before we get a final number through. This is what the number was that we took the loan out for that bleacher project, though.
What's the time frame as far as replacing?
If we can get this going and done, we still believe that what we're looking at doing right now is starting the demolition and at the end of track season in the spring. So whenever we host our last,
Should be like the second week of May, I think.
right? And then it will be done before we begin in August for home football games.
Awesome.
So that's the goal at this point in time, and it's still feasible as long as we keep moving on it.
Okay.
So,
Roll call, please.
Mrs. Cope?
Yes.
Mrs. Larson?
Yes.
Mr. McCutcheon?
Yes.
Mr. Lane?
Yes.
Motion carried.
And 12C is to approve the proposal from LPM Electric.
So moved.
Second.
You're both waiting.
Oh,
Jumped in at the same
so
time.
this was an unforeseen issue that we had going into this project at the high school field. The light poles that are there were actually installed when the building was built, and the footprint of the soccer field where it will be going in and lacrosse, the turf, will actually be 2 light poles would have been on the field based off of the way that they were installed and where they were at. So they can't do that, obviously. Those are concrete poles poured in a solid form. So when they go to take them out, the concrete is likely stressed and weakened. The company said, we can't just move them. So this cost is to replace 2 poles, and while they're down, then replace the lights on them, and so that would move from they would be LED on all 4 poles, which is a greater efficiency, but also just, it's the more up-to-date and to host a high school event on those fields. So Scott and I have talked about this. I think the best plan is moving forward, that this is gonna need to be something that's paid for out of our TIF money that comes in from Miami Valley Gaming, because it was not accounted for in the, original loan for that purchase. So, but there's no way for us to, they have to move. We also need to begin with our Legacy Project campaign and begin seeking support and donations for things, and those can come in. So the quote that we have and the agreement that we have for moats was in the amount that was originally budgeted for. And
For the field itself.
for the field itself, but this was not included in that cost. So, we had to go with this company in order to not have to replace all 4 light poles, because they would not, this company is, they will warranty and guarantee the work and know how to fasten these lights to the concrete poles. Other places that were checked into by the construction company and the engineers wouldn't hang new lights on existing concrete poles that were there, just because of the, it's not our stuff, we're not touching it type of
Yeah.
thing. So this is the cheaper option. I understand it's not a lot. This is the cheaper option than replacing all 4 poles, which was the other alternative.
But it's still just as safe and secure as.
Yeah, I mean, those poles have been there for 20 plus years at this point in time. So,
Okay.
and there's nothing wrong with them besides the fact they're in the way.
You have some screens in place when you're running off.
Correct. I mean, you just gotta get close to them, hope somebody runs into it, right? I mean,
Not safe at all.
not safe.
So roll call, please.
Mr. McCutcheon?
Yes.
Mrs. Larson?
Yes.
Mr. Lane?
Yes.
Mrs. Cope?
Yes.
Motion carried.
And item 13, need a motion to enter into executive session for the consideration, to consider the employment and compensation of a public employee or official.
So moved.
Second.
And before we do roll call, I will just make everybody aware, we will not be coming out and voting on any items, so.
For the 2 high school students that are here watching our board meeting tonight, that means you can go home now. Thank you for coming.
So roll call, please.
Mrs. Larson?
Yes.
Mrs. Cope?
Yes.
Mr. McCutcheon?
Yes.
Mr. Lane?
Yes.
Motion carried.
This is your chance. You wanna say anything before we go? Something to give?
He's not signing that.